You've learned your endings for the present tense conjugation, and then you noticed that some verbs behave very strangely. Let's see why. Hello and welcome to another Spanish lesson with me, Eva. Today we will be talking about irregularities in verb conjugation. More specifically, I will give you examples for irregularities in the present tense. But there is one thing that is, let's say, typical of Spanish verb irregularities or Spanish irregular verbs, regardless of what tense you are conjugating them in, regardless of what tense you are using them in. The irregularities will never affect the ending. So when you learn those 6 typical endings for each conjugation, be it present, past, or future tenses, those endings will always hold true. Nothing will happen with the endings. There are no irregularities with the endings. The irregularities always happen in, or the changes always happen in the root of the verb. So once we take away the typical infinitive ending ar, er, or ir, and we attach the endings of the conjugation of the tense that we need, those will stay in place and we won't have to worry about those. What we do have to worry about is the root. The root will sometimes, not always, but in case of those irregular verbs, the root will change, okay? And that's true for all irregular verbs, regardless of which tense we are talking about. So again, the irregularities in Spanish only happen in the root of the verb, but never with the endings, okay? So once you learn the endings, your job there is done, okay? Now, as I said, today we will talk about irregular verbs in the present tense, in presente indicativo, okay? And as always, well, at least in Spanish, there are 3 different kinds of irregular verbs, okay? Some verbs show irregularities that we only see with those verbs, okay? We can't talk about a whole bunch of verbs that present the same irregularity. So when you only have an irregularity that happens, you know, once with one verb, maybe 2, we talk about really purely irregular verbs. And then we have irregularities that actually repeat over and over again. And we can say, look, this group of verbs presents this regularity, and they all sort of do it the same way. So in a way, we can talk about regular irregularities, those that repeat. And then there's a third group where we are only talking about irregularities in writing, in spelling. The verb as such, or the root of the verb, will not change. What will change is the spelling, okay? So, again, 3 different types of irregular verbs. The first, as I said earlier, are the ones which have very peculiar, we can say, personalized irregularities that we don't see in any other verb. In case of the present tense, or presente indicativo, there are 13, I know, not a lucky number at all, there are 13 verbs that have very unique irregularities, okay? I'm going to write them here, and I'm going to divide them in 3 groups, okay? The first group are going to be those verbs where the irregularity, or where the root of the verb only changes in the first person singular. So when I say yo, when I speak in my own name, okay? So only the first person singular yo or I is when we see this irregularity where the root of the verb changes, okay? So first person singular, and the verbs here are poner. Poner is to put something down or to place something down, to put something on use or dress, to wear something. Poner has a lot of different meanings. And poner in the first person singular is pongo, okay? And the rest are all according to the rule. So it would be pongo, we have this G, and then the rest would go pones, pone, ponemos, ponéis, ponen. Okay, so the only irregularity is in the first person singular. Okay, same is true for salir. Salir means to go out. And again, we have the G here for the first person singular, salgo. I go out is salgo. And the rest is then, again, according to the rule. No irregularities with the other 5 persons. So it would be salgo and then sales. Sale, salimos, salís, salen. Okay? Another one is saber, to know something. And again, the first person singular is irregular, se, and the rest are regular. Sabes, sabe, sabemos, sabéis, saben. Okay? Another one is hacer, to do or to make something. Again, first person irregular, hago, and the rest regular. Haces, hace, hacemos, hacéis, hacen. We have a few more. Caer is to fall, caigo, and then caes, cae, caemos, caéis, caen. Okay? Another one is dar, to give, doy, and then the rest are regular. Das, da, damos, dais, dan. Okay? And the last one here in this group, caber. Caber means to fit into something, into a space. No, it has other meanings as well as nearly every verb. But let's say the typical one is to fit, to be able to fit into something. No, maybe a person, I can't fit into a really small size dress. No, so for the first person singular, again, quepo or no quepo if I can't fit into it, and then the rest again are regular. Cabes, cabe, cabemos, cabéis, caben. Okay, so this group have very peculiar irregularities. The irregularities that you see in this group, they don't repeat over and over again with other verbs. They are really typical only of these, okay? And as I said earlier, as you've seen, they only affect the first person singular, okay? But not the rest. Then we have another group of verbs where, again, their peculiarity or their irregularity is only typical of those verbs, okay? But not of many others. And in this case, it's not just the first person singular that gets affected. Here we are talking about one of my favorite, let's say, tools to help you with Spanish conjugations, with Spanish tools, and it's the so-called boot, okay? So I will just draw a boot here, and a boot basically represents first person singular, second person singular, and third person singular. And then what's outside the boot, so it will not be irregular here, it will not be affected by this irregularity, are the first and second person plural, so nosotros and vosotros. Okay, these two will stay out, will remain regular. And then again with the third person plural, and I'm only writing the masculine forms, so it's nosotros and of course nosotras, vosotros and vosotras, and ellos and ellas. But okay, just to make it simple, I gave you examples of masculine pronouns only. Again, the third person plural will again be irregular, okay? So this is the famous boot that I like to talk about so much. Okay, so there's a group of verbs here that will again only show irregularities, only be irregular inside the boot, but not outside, okay? So let's start. The first one is tener, to have, okay? So tener will be irregular inside the boot. Tengo, tienes, tiene. Tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Okay? The irregularities inside the boot are not always the same. For yo, we had this G, tengo. Okay? There's no G in tener. And yet when I say I have, suddenly out of nowhere, a G appears. Tengo. With tú, we lose the G, but we get something else. E becomes IE. And we say tienes, tiene. Tenemos, tenéis, and again, tienen. Okay? So the irregularities inside the boot are not even the same for all of these persons. No? Yo had a different irregularity to the rest. Okay? Good. So, tener, one more time. Tengo, tienes, tiene. Tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Okay? Good. Another one here is venir, to come or to arrive. And again, vengo, vienes, viene, venimos, venís, vienen. Okay? Another one is oír. Oír is to hear something or someone, and it's oigo, oyes, oye, oímos, oís, oyen. Okay? And the last one here is decir, to say something or speak up. Decir is digo, dices, dice, decimos, decís, dicen. Okay? Again, the irregularities inside the boot are different depending on the person. Okay? And then there's another group of these really irregular verbs where every single person, we're not talking about only first person singular, we are not talking only about the boot, we are talking about all. Okay? So there's two verbs where everything, all of the persons, singular in three in singular and the three in plural, they will all be irregular. okay? One is ir, to go. Voy, vas, va. Vamos, vais, van. Okay? As you can see, voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van doesn't look at all like ir. It's a very, very irregular verb. Okay? So to go, very irregular. And another one is haber. Now, haber is in Spanish is only used as an auxiliary verb, okay? It's like the verb to have in English when we use it as an auxiliary verb. So when have doesn't really mean to have something, to own something, to possess something, when have is only used as an auxiliary verb alongside another verb. So for example, I have seen, okay? Have here is only to help, to assist the other verb, the main verb, the verb to see, okay? So have doesn't have that meaning anymore. And the same is with haber. Long time ago, haber had the meaning and it was used with that meaning as well, just like you can use it in English and you can say I have a brother and a sister, and it means that, you know, not that I own them, but that I have something. Haber lost that role, so to speak. Now haber only exists as an auxiliary verb, okay? And of course, we still have to conjugate it. So haber in the present tense would be has, ha, hemos, habéis, han, okay? Has, ha, hemos, habéis, han. Okay? Good. Okay, so these 13, I think they are 13, 7, 11, 12, and 2, 13. So these 13 verbs are irregular in the present tense in Spanish, in presente indicativo, okay? So the irregularities that happen here, they don't repeat over and over with other verbs, okay? They are really only specific to these verbs here. Now, apart from these really irregular verbs, we can talk about other irregular verbs, but they have irregularities which they share with other verbs, okay? So one of them is when from the root of the verb changes into ie or ye, okay? I will give you just a couple of examples so you see it, let's say, in action. So for example, a verb ending in ar that has an e in the root, and this root, e, will change into ye, but again, only inside the boot, okay? Be aware of these. These, we can call them regular irregularities or repeated or repetitive irregularities. These only take place inside the boot, okay? So let's see how pensar would be conjugated in the present tense, in presente indicativo. Again, inside the boot, we have to change this e into ye, ie, ye. Pienso, piensas, piensa. Pensamos, pensáis, piensan. Okay? I hope you can see how maybe with the intonation I try to single out these two, nosotros and vosotros, which do not show any irregularity. Okay? A verb that has an e in the root, but it ends with an er, so it belongs to the second conjugation. is querer, to want something or to love someone. And again, this will become ye, okay? Again, only inside the boot. So we will say quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, queréis, quieren, okay? And another one that ends with, this one ended with and another one that ends with ir. So we have examples from all three conjugations. The first one, where verbs end in ar. The second one, when verbs end in and the third one, where the verbs end in ir, okay? Again, we have in the root, and this will become ye inside the boot. Miento, mientes, miente, mentimos, mentís, mienten, okay? Good. Okay, so this change can affect verbs from the first, second, or the third conjugation. Okay, of course, not all of them. In fact, not even the majority. It's a very small minority of verbs which show this irregularity. Okay. Another one is when o in the root becomes we. Okay. And again, we can have verbs, we find verbs showing this irregularity in the first, second, and the third conjugation. Okay, so let's see. From the first one, we have contar. Okay, that's the first conjugation, a verb ending with ar, and this o will become we inside the boot only, okay? And we will say I count, you count, she counts, we count, you count, they count. We will say it in Spanish. Cuento, cuentas, cuenta, contamos, contáis, cuentan, okay? An example with the second, from the second conjugation, again, this o will become we inside the boot. Vuelvo, vuelves, vuelve, volvemos, volvéis, vuelven. Okay? And an example of a verb from the third conjugation, ir, morir, to die. Volver was to return. So morir, to die, is muero, mueres, muere, morimos, morís, mueren. Okay? And there is one more where will simply change to I. Here we had changing to ye, a diphthong, and here we have changing to I, and this one only affects some verbs in the third conjugation. So we have no examples from the first conjugation, we have no examples from the third conjugation, only a few verbs from the third one, so ending in ir, will show this irregularity. And an example is servir, to serve. Okay, so this, again, it's the third conjugation, and it's this from the root that will change to I. Again, only inside the boot. Okay, so we will say sirvo, sirves, sirve, servimos, servís, sirven. Okay, so became I inside the boot. Okay, there's other verbs that will behave the same. Again, in this case, with this change only in the third conjugation, this one and this one, we will find irregular verbs in all three, in the first, second, and the third. As I said, the irregularities here are really only specific of these verbs. They do not repeat. These three regularities, we come across them more than just once. Okay, so we can find examples of this one in the three conjugations, ar, er, and ir. We can find examples of this irregularity in the first, second, and the third conjugation. And we can find examples, again, more than just one, in not the first, not the second, only the third conjugation. But we find examples. There are more than just one. Unlike with irregularities here, where we only have them with these verbs, but they don't repeat much. Okay, good. So again, the first group are irregular verbs. This group are what we can maybe describe as regular irregular verbs, because we do see some regularities within the irregularities. Okay, and then, as I mentioned earlier, there is a third group which I will leave for another time, because it really only affects the spelling. When you speak or you hear someone else speak, you will not notice anything different, anything strange, okay? But you would notice it in writing, okay? I'm going to leave that for another lesson, because I do understand most learners of Spanish don't really need to worry much about writing, but it is good to know, because even if you yourself don't have to write, very often you have to read something, and it's possible that you might not recognize the verb for what it is if the spelling is slightly different, okay? But when it comes to speaking and actually hearing something different, hearing different sounds, we are only dealing with these two groups. And as you have seen, and this is true for the present tense and all other tenses in Spanish, the irregularities only take place in the root of the verb, okay? The endings are always regular. No, there are no changes, nothing unusual happens with the endings. So once you learn your endings, in this case for the present tense, o, as, a, amos, ais, and an, you will see, you will use, you will hear these endings with every single verb in present tense, regardless of whether it's first, second, this is the first conjugation only, then there's endings for the second and the third, but regardless of whether the verb is regular or irregular, okay? So all the verbs in the first conjugation, regular and irregular ones, will have these endings. Then we have endings for the second conjugation, and all the verbs in the second conjugation, the regular and irregular ones, will have those endings. And the same goes for the third conjugation. The regular and the irregular verbs from the third conjugation will still have the same endings. Okay? Good. Okay, well, that will be all for today. I've explained these irregularities so that you understand what happens. The main thing is to know that they only take place in the main part of the verb, in the root of the verb, so not in the ending. But really what I suggest is that obviously you find the conjugation for these verbs. You always write them out in a grid, okay? So this is the singular, this is the plural, first person, second person, and the third person, okay? Because then it's also easier to draw the boot, no? And see it visually in front of you. But what I would suggest is that you go beyond the theory, okay, the theoretical part, and you just repeat these verbs. I don't know, let's say poner, over and over again. Pongo, pones, pone, ponemos, ponéis, ponen. You repeat it so many times that when you have to use it, only one of those 6 will come out. You won't be struggling, you won't be thinking, oh, how does this go? Does this belong to this group or that group? Is it only irregular in the first person or the second person? You will basically forget about the rules and you will internalize, automatize those 6. Pongo, pones, pone, ponemos, ponéis, ponen, without really knowing which one is irregular and is there anything irregular. You just learn it. Pongo, pones, pone, ponemos, ponéis, ponen. And if you can get into the habit of doing it rhythmically, it's even better. Or, I don't know, tener. Tengo, tienes, tiene. Tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Ir. Voy, vas, va. Vamos, vais, van. And you repeat it many, many times. And then these sounds will just sort of become recorded in your brain. No? Voy, vas, va. Vamos, vais, van. And you won't be tempted to say anything else because you will already have it there in your brain. No? Same for these. When you're learning the conjugation, yes, have these endings because they do hold true for every verb. No? But just learn the verbs as words without really worrying, you know, where this G comes from, pongo. Just accept, okay, it's not poneo, it's pongo. I don't care why. Obviously, there's something weird happening here. I'll just accept it. It's the way it is. It's the way the Spanish speak, and I want to learn it that way. So you just repeat pongo, pones, pone, ponemos, ponéis, ponen. Okay? Good. Okay. As I said earlier, that's all for today. I hope it was useful, at least to understand where these irregularities come from. But really, when you put it into practice, I swear by repetition more than learning these rules and worrying about theory. Okay? So good luck repeating, good luck drilling these verbs, and I'll see you in the next lesson.